Archaeologists divided Caribbean prehistory into two broad eras, the Archaic and the Ceramic. The latter was defined by pottery, agriculture, and large villages. But the Archaic people? Their legacy was quieter, buried under centuries of migration, conquest, and myth. They left no cities, no temples, only clues. And yet, they were the first. They were the ones who saw these islands before anyone else did. Until recently, though, they remained a mystery. Who were they? Where did they come from? Did their descendants survive, or were they erased by time and waves? The answers were locked, not in ruins, but in bones. Now, with the help of ancient DNA, the story is beginning to change. The Archaic age may no longer be silent. And what we're discovering is rewriting everything we thought we knew about the origins of Caribbean life. They weren't who we thought, and neither is this story. Then, the sea brought something new. Roughly 2,800 years ago, the calm rhythm of life in the Caribbean began to shift. Another wave of people arrived, different tools, different customs, and a radically different way of life. These newcomers didn't just survive the islands, they shaped them. They were farmers, not foragers, potters, not only fishers. They came with clay, crops, and new ideas. Archaeologists would later call this moment the beginning of the Ceramic Age, and it changed everything. This wasn't an evolution, it was a replacement. With their arrival came transformation. These settlers built permanent villages, cleared land, and cultivated plants like manioc, maize, and sweet potatoes. Their pottery was delicate, decorated, and varied clues to distinct cultural traditions. Unlike the Archaic foragers, these people stayed put, and as they spread, so did their way of life. The islands began to grow roots. Genetic evidence now confirms what many archaeologists suspected. These Ceramic Age peoples came from northern South America, most likely from what is today Colombia and Venezuela. They spoke Arawakan languages, still spoken today by indigenous groups like the Piapoco. These early farmers began a northward migration, island hopping through the Lesser Antilles, touching places like St. Lucia, Guadeloupe, and Puerto Rico, before eventually reaching Cuba and the Bahamas. They didn't drift, they navigated with intent. This was not a random wave of migration, it was a deliberate expansion, a people in motion, reshaping the region as they went. They brought not only their genetics, but also their worldview, their stories, their gods. Over generations, they became the ancestors of the Tainothi indigenous people, encountered by Columbus centuries later. These weren't just migrants, they were architects of culture. And yet, as their villages grew, the memory of the Archaic people began to fade, but the old and the new were not done with each other. On some islands, their paths would cross briefly, and in surprising ways. The next chapter begins not with pottery, but with a mystery. Stories carved in stone are one thing, but DNA tells its own tale. For years, archaeologists speculated about the relationships between the Caribbean's earliest peoples, but without written records or preserved oral traditions, much of that history remained out of reach. Then came a breakthrough: ancient DNA, recovered from bones buried beneath layers of soil, time, and silence. Scientists sequenced the genomes of 93 individuals from 16 archaeological sites, spanning the Bahamas, Cuba, Puerto Rico, and beyond. What they uncovered redrew the map of Caribbean ancestry. The truth was in their blood. Using tools like principal component analysis, PCA, and admixture models, researchers discovered something remarkable. The Caribbean was home to two genetically distinct populations. The first was tied to the Archaic Age individuals like CIP-0009 from Cuba. Their DNA showed surprising similarity to indigenous peoples from California's Channel Islands, thousands of kilometers away. This suggested a possible migration route from North America, one previously unimagined. The sea had connected places we never thought to link. The second group, the Ceramic Age farmers, showed no such link. Instead, their DNA clustered tightly with indigenous groups from northern South America, particularly those living along the Orinoco River in what is now Colombia and Venezuela. These were the people who would become the Taino, and among the samples recovered in the Bahamas, their genetic profile was clear. They belonged to this second wave. In the Bahamas, the old had been replaced. Curiously, only a single case of mixed ancestry was found in an individual from Puerto Rico, but across the Bahamian sites, no such blending appeared, the two groups, Archaic and Ceramachad, not merged. One had replaced the other almost entirely. Two peoples, two paths and barely a crossing. The implications were profound. For centuries, we thought of the Caribbean as a melting pot, but the DNA told a different story, not of mixture, but of succession. The silence of the Archaic Age was not just cultural, it was genetic. And in that silence, a new story was born. They shared the same sea but not the same blood. Despite inhabiting the same islands, the archaic foragers and ceramic farmers lived almost entirely apart. It wasn't just a difference in ancestry, it was a difference in everything: language, lifestyle, belief. You might expect that, over time, intermarriage or cultural blending would occur. But the genetic evidence says otherwise. These two populations rarely, if ever, mixed. Isolation wasn't just physical, it was cultural. So, why didn't they come together? Part of the answer may lie in the landscape itself. The Caribbean is not a continuous continent, it's a necklace of scattered islands, separated by currents, reefs, and open sea. On land, things weren't easier. Many islands are carved with rugged hills, thick forests, and deep cave systems perfect for seclusion. The archaic people especially seem to favor these hidden environments. Geography can divide as powerfully as ideology, but distance alone can't explain everything. The cultural gulf may have run just as deep. Archaic and ceramic peoples lived in vastly different ways. One group hunted and gathered, the other planted and stored. One lived lightly on the land, the other built settlements. It's possible they spoke unrelated languages, held conflicting beliefs, or claimed separate territories. They may have met as strangers or as rivals. Nowhere is this separation clearer than in the Bahamas. DNA from ceramic age individuals in the region shows almost no trace of archaic ancestry. It's as if the earlier people vanished without a genetic echo. Whether they moved on, were displaced, or simply dwindled over time, one thing is clear. In this part of the Caribbean, succession replaced integration. One people followed another, but did not join them. This isolation challenges romantic ideas of peaceful merging or shared roots. Instead, it tells a harder truth. Sometimes, history is layered, not blended. And sometimes, silence between groups says more than conflict ever could. Their distance wasn't measured in miles, but in memory. What if everything we thought we knew was only half the story? For generations, the history of the Bahamas began with the Tainate ceramic age farmers, known for their pottery, agriculture, and wide cultural influence. Their arrival painted the earliest chapter in textbooks, museum exhibits, and public memory. But the latest DNA findings upend that timeline. It turns out they were not the first. They arrived, but others had already left their footprints in the sand. Ancient DNA shows the Bahamas were first settled by a completely different group, long before the Taino. These earliest inhabitants, archaic foragers, left no cities, no great monuments, but they were there. Their genetic echoes are faint, or in some places, completely gone, replaced by the ceramic age wave that followed. History has layer sand, this one was hidden deep. This revelation doesn't just rewrite a regional timeline, it challenges identity. It questions how we define first peoples and whose stories get remembered. In the case of the Bahamas, a population that once thrived was nearly erased, not by war, perhaps, but by time, migration, and silence. Their legacy now survives only through bone, buried deep beneath island soil. What we forget can be just as important as what we remember. And yet, the story isn't finished. Far from it. The genetic data recovered so far is powerful but incomplete. Researchers call for more DNA sampling, especially from Hispaniola, where both archaic and ceramic peoples likely coexisted. That island may hold the key to understanding when, how, and if these two worlds ever truly touched. The answers may still be waiting in bones yet unearthed. This is the promise of ancient DNA. It gives voice to the voiceless. It restores missing chapters. And in the case of the Bahamas, it shows us that first isn't always who we thought it was. Sometimes, it takes science, not mythos, set the record straight. The past is still speaking, we just have to listen. In 53, a mysterious killer erased nearly 2/3 of Europe's population. Streets turned silent, families vanished overnight, and the living dug graves faster than they could mourn. This was no ordinary disease. This was the Black Death. And once it arrived, there was no going back. Death moved faster than whispers. Fear spread faster than the plague itself. Known by many names, the Great Mortality, the Pestilence, the Plague, it became a defining horror of the medieval world. In towns from Florence to London, Paris to Prague, bodies piled high while doctors, priests, and kings watched helplessly. Some thought it was divine punishment. Others blamed foul air, foreign enemies, or angry stars. But all they really knew was this: it killed without mercy, without pause, and without explanation. No one was safe, and nothing made sense. Hope rotted faster than corpses. When the dead outnumber the living, everything changes. Entire economies collapsed. Trade routes fell silent. Villages were abandoned. And when the wave of death finally subsided, the survivors emerged into a different world. With so many dead, labor became scarce, empires weakened, and a new social order began to rise from the ashes. Feudalism cracked. Religious faith was shaken. The Renaissance soon followed, as if civilization had inhaled death and exhaled rebirth. Out of ruin came revolution. Chaos became the architect of change. But through all that loss, one question never died. Yet despite its apocalyptic impact, the plague left behind more questions than answers. For over 600 years, scientists, scholars, and skeptics have hunted the truth. Where did this invisible killer come from? What force could have sparked such unimaginable destruction? Textbooks offered guesses: China, India, Crimea, but the evidence was always fragmented, incomplete, and frustratingly vague. The story had a beginning, we just hadn't found it yet. The truth was buried, but not forever. Sometimes, history hides in the most overlooked places. Now, thanks to a shocking convergence of forgotten archaeology and cutting-edge DNA science, the silence is finally breaking. It turns out, the key to unlocking the Black Death's origin wasn't hidden in medieval manuscripts or ancient myths. It was etched on a single weathered gravestone, high in the mountains of Central Asia. A word carved in stone, a word we all fear: pestilence. And that single word is about to rewrite history. The door to history's deadliest mystery just creaked open. The silence has ended. The truth is calling. And what lies beyond that door changes everything we thought we knew about the past, and possibly the future. A forgotten graveyard, a chilling inscription, and the first clue in a centuries-old cold case. Sometimes, the past whispers through forgotten stones. In the summer of 1886, a team of Russian archaeologists set out to explore a pair of modest cemeteries near the village of Karajigak, nestled in the rugged terrain near Lake Issyk-Kul in present-day Kyrgyzstan. At first glance, it was an unassuming sight, dusty, remote, and forgotten by time. But what they uncovered there would prove to be one of the most overlooked historical clues in the story of the Black Death. What seemed like a footnote would soon become a headline. Truth waits in the dirt. A single word can outlive an empire. These were the graves of a small, once thriving Christian trading community, a branch of the Silk Road that pulsed with goods, stories, and disease. The archaeologists unearthed dozens of headstones, each one marked with a name, a date, and in several cases, a single, ominous word: pestilence. Most striking were the years, 1338 and 1339. This was nearly a full decade before the plague ever reached the shores of Europe. It wasn't just early, it was the beginning. A single word can echo for centuries. Some discoveries are made, only to be forgotten. To the archaeologists, it was curious but not urgent. They noted the findings, boxed the bones, and shipped them to a museum in St. Petersburg. There they were labeled, shelved, and slowly forgotten. For more than 100 years, these remains sat in quiet obscurity, their secrets sealed behind glass and dust. No one imagined they were holding the genetic fingerprint of history's most feared pandemic. And yet, behind museum glass, the truth waited. Lost evidence doesn't stay lost forever. Real discoveries begin with a second look. Then came Philip Slavin, a medieval historian with a curious mind and a nose for anomalies. While combing through economic data and archival records, Slavin stumbled upon references to the 1886 excavation. Something didn't add up. A sudden, localized mortality spike in a remote Silk Road outpost just before the Black Death? He pored over field notes, gravestone inscriptions, and death records, realizing this wasn't a coincidence, it was a crisis. And this crisis had left behind a paper trail. Patterns hide in plain sight. Data means nothing without someone willing to ask why. Over 118 burials in 2 years. many with the same cryptic inscription. Slavin suspected he had found the origin point, but suspicion is not proof, not without hard science. Still, his research caught the attention of paleogeneticists and global media alike. As CBS News, ABC News, and Nature would later report, these forgotten graves were far more than just ancient history. They were the starting line of the deadliest race humanity ever lost. A silent cemetery had just become the loudest clue in history. A silent village may have spoken the first word of a global tragedy. What comes next will connect bones, bacteria, and a buried beginning. The scientists take over. DNA will speak where history once fell silent. The bones are about to tell their story. Sometimes, science is the only voice the dead have left. When Philip Slavin pieced together the strange puzzle surrounding those ancient graves, he knew he was onto something, but historians work with stories, not proof. To confirm what he believed, that the Black Death began here, he needed science to speak where history fell short. That call was answered by the paleogeneticists at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology in Germany. Their mission? Unlock the microbial secrets hidden in medieval teeth, and what they found would rewrite the history of disease. The past is trapped in enamel. Beneath enamel lies a frozen battlefield. Working with Russian curators who still held the 1,886 remains, the team selected 7 individuals buried near Lake Issyk-Kul between 1,338 and 1,339. They didn't need full skeletons, just teeth. Deep inside the dental pulp, bloodborne pathogens can remain sealed off from oxygen and decay for centuries. The researchers drilled into the teeth with surgical precision, extracting ancient DNA that had been sleeping for nearly 700 years. Tiny traces, monumental consequences. Centuries-old blood speaks in code. Sometimes, history confesses in a single molecule. What they found was breathtaking. In the remains of 3 individuals, they identified unmistakable traces of Yersinia pestis, the bacterium responsible for the Black Death. It wasn't just a fragment or a partial match. This was a complete genetic fingerprint, a smoking gun. For the first time, science had caught the killer red-handed right at the scene of the crime, nearly a decade before it reached Europe. The killer had a name, and now it had a birthplace. One name, one killer, Yersinia pestis. But the story doesn't end with identification, it begins there. The team then compared the DNA to a global database of plague genomes, over 1,300 strains gathered from rodent burrows, archaeological sites, and human remains across centuries. That's when the breakthrough happened. Around the early 1302, Y. pestis had undergone a dramatic genetic burst, a so-called Big Bang. 4 major lineages exploded from a single ancestor. And the DNA from Kyrgyzstan? It matched that ancestor perfectly. This wasn't just old plague, it was the original plague. This was patient 0. The ripple started in Kyrgyzstan, but the wave drowned a continent. This wasn't just an early strain, it was the strain, the mother of all pandemics. Every later outbreak, including the Black Death that devastated Europe and lingered for centuries, descended from this singular genetic source. As natureandscience.org confirmed, the graves in Kyrgyzstan weren't a random hotspot. They were ground zero, the very root of history's darkest epidemic. From the tooth of a merchant to the fall of nations, the data drew a straight line